Alright, welcome back. So I'm going to go around the shop, demonstrate a couple tools. Here we have the table saw, Sawstop, which is pretty fancy. This machine, when it detects your finger, it'll actually activate a mechanism. It'll put a brake to the blade and then drop down to save your finger from getting cut off. You, as the operator, should always do whatever it takes to minimize your hand being in that area, right? So, a couple things to note. Down here we have the sort of the switch. This is to activate the computer, and then this activates the blade, right? So you pull that out. And it's a nice big paddle so that when you need to stop the blade, you can just hit it. You have a couple different settings on the front. This one will lower or raise the blade. The one on the side is to adjust the angle, right? So you could tilt the blade one way or the other, right? You have the fence, right, which slides back and forth on this rail. This rail does have a ruler on it. Most shops will keep this pretty accurate by adjusting this indicator right here, but you should always double check with your tape measure. You have the blade, you have the riving knife, and the kickback prawls. Right? So the kickback prawls have these teeth on them to prevent kickback, right? And the riving knife is meant to keep mostly like pine and milled lumber like that from coming back, right? So when you're cutting like 1x3, 1x6, all that material, you know, it's a tight-knit grain, you're sawing through, right, to separate it, but it's going to want to come back a little bit. So we got the riving knife to protect you from that. Up here, we have the guard. This guard, right, is meant to do a couple things. Meant to prevent, you know, some dust going in your face. It's meant as a reminder to, you know, keep your hands away from the blade, right? Prevent accidental, you know, slices, and it keeps the dust down. Right. So, say for example, I'm going to cut this piece. So I'm going to measure 1 foot. Now remember, when you're using this machine, this is what you're keeping, and this is the offcut, right? So when you run it through, you're keeping the material between the edge of the blade and the fence, right? Now you gotta remember the blade has a thickness, probably around 1/8 of an inch, give or take. So you wanna make sure your measurement is from the right side of the tooth to the fence. Demonstrate that. So, see that right side of the tooth is at the 12-inch mark, the 1 foot mark. It's not like that, right? So now that I'm all measured up, right, I'm gonna put the guard down, turn on the dust collector, right, which is on that wall over there, which is the button. I won't do it for this demonstration. Always wear eye protection, ear protection, and you're good to go. Now remember, with a table saw, you got to treat it like a horse, right? If you treat it well, right, maintain it, you'll get to travel wherever you want to go, nice and smooth. If you kick it the wrong direction, if you treat it like shit, it's gonna kick back and it's gonna fucking hurt. All right. So you got that switch. and then you shut it off. Now you still have this little piece left over. Wait for the blade to come to a complete stop, and then knock that piece out the way. When you're cutting, make sure the piece that you're pushing through goes past the blade, right? You don't want to cut and then like leave it, you know, like that, because then it's going to want to come back. So just make sure you kick it out the way all the way, and then for the offcut, just wait for the blade to stop and push it off to the side, right? And then take your scrap, you know, if you got to break it up, whatever, throw it in the trash. Done. Now, say for example, you needed to cut something really thin, right? Something like that. So whenever you're sort of cutting in this red zone, you use a push stick, right? Never use a push stick like out here, right? There's no purpose to that, right? Only use a push stick when you're cutting little pieces, right? If you could imagine, you know, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but if this was a big sheet that you were cutting and you're going to use this little edge to push, I mean, that's, you know, it's not giving you a whole lot of control, right? So you want to keep your hand one firm, one just sort of guide. But you want to keep your sort of weight on this side, right? When the blade's down, you could use your other hand, try to keep it tight, and just go through. When using the table saw, right, the part that contacts the fence should always be longer than it is wider, right? Say, for example, this piece of pine 1x3, right? You would never try to cut this in this orientation, right? Very little contact and a whole lot of leverage. What's going to happen here, you know, you really can't keep this straight. You know, I don't care how steady you think you are. If you try to keep this straight, it's going to twist and it's going to snap and it's going to hurt, right? But if you were on this edge against the fence, right, you have a lot of contact area to feed through and push, right? So just make sure the part that touches the fence should always be longer than the opposite direction, right? Same thing goes for the radial arm saw, which we're going to go to next, right? So this is the radial, right? It's a saw, right? Radial arm saw. This is the arm. That's the saw. You have the fence here, and you have the switch down here. Green is go, red is stop. Pretty self-explanatory. So what you want to do is measure your board, right? Make your mark. Get that lined up, and you could, I'll exaggerate the line a little bit. But you want the mark to be, if you're keeping this piece, and you don't need that piece, right? Similar to the way we adjusted the table saw, you want the blade to be on the offcut side of the board. Right. So now that's all good and dandy. You want to make sure this board that you're cutting, right? You know, clear any debris, whatever, and make sure this board is in contact with the fence, right? And then you're gonna turn it on. and voila, you just cut your stick lumber down. So similar to how I was explaining the table saw, right? You want the long side to be in contact with the fence, right? And you're cutting this way. What you don't want to do with this machine is something like this, right? Very little contact, and you're trying to cut all this material. That's no good, dangerous, you're gonna get fucked. Don't do that. Right? The good thing about the radial arm saw and the way that we have it set up is you can actually cut, bigger pieces, some pieces of plywood. Because you can see this entire arm travels all the way out. So you can cut like 2-foot boards. You can cut some longer pieces, different materials. Cool. Now I'm gonna move over. Here we have the bandsaw. Right. Move that out the way. Now this particular machine is really good at cutting, different shapes, multiple angles. So say you needed to cut a piece. Say you need to cut like this profile. You would use this machine, right? You can't use the radial arm saw, right? Because it doesn't turn, it doesn't do stuff like that. Same thing with the table saw. It's just meant to cut straight. This one is meant to cut curves, stuff like that. So on the side here, you have different adjustments. Now typically, right, you want the material, the sort of distance between the material and the bottom here to be about like 1 finger. And this is something you could eyeball, right? What you don't want is, if you're cutting this thin piece, you don't want all this empty void, right? Because what's going to happen, you're going to get comfortable and you're going to cut your finger, right? Right, you want it to be low, right? You want it to be high enough so that you can still, see the line, but low enough so that you're not accidentally cutting your finger, right? Now the reason it would go up so high is if you're cutting, say, a block of wood, that's like 12 inches tall, or if you're cutting a piece of foam that's been stacked. That's why you sort of need that height. So I'm gonna cut this piece, switch right here, same exact switch as the radial arm saw. You wanna let it get to full speed, and you can sort of hear it, right? Probably about 5 seconds, right? And you just want to follow that line. Right. When you're done, you leave the piece, turn the saw off. I usually push the stop button twice, and then over on the side here, there's a brake. So you want to ease on the brake, right? Right, kind of like a car, right? You ease on it. You let it slow down. And as you get closer to the light, you step a little harder. What you don't want to do is slam on the brake, because that's gonna fuck up the blade. It's gonna screw up the momentum of everything. Just ease on the brake. There you go. Nice, cool profile cut for whatever. And yeah, that's the 3 key tools I'll demonstrate in this video. See you guys later.